Not every hero wears their medals on their chest, and not every stranger is who they seem to be. Would you recognize true sacrifice if it stood quietly in front of you? Let us know in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe to honor stories like this. Peter Greene adjusted the brim of his worn cap as he shuffled through the automatic glass doors of Marigold Regional Hospital, the same hospital he had once dreamed into existence decades ago. The halls inside buzzed with life, nurses briskly walking with clipboards, visitors speaking in hushed voices, the beeping of monitors somewhere in the distance. None of them spared a second glance at the elderly man in the olive green jacket, whose gait was slow but determined. His movements were those of someone whose body had fought many battles, some visible, most not. The front desk clerk didn't even lift her head when he passed. Peter didn't mind. He was never the kind of man who needed applause. Recognition had never been the reason he signed those papers back in 1968. Never the reason he fought through jungles, deserts, and bureaucracy to bring this building to life. As he turned down the main corridor, passing the donor wall without so much as a glance, a sharp voice cut through the white noise of the hospital. "Hey, sir." Peter paused, his hand resting lightly on the cold metal railing lining the hallway. A tall, broad-shouldered security guard in a Navy uniform approached, his boots clicking sharply against the floor. His name tag read D. Simmons, but the bark in his voice suggested he preferred authority over courtesy. "You can't just wander around here. Patients and families only," Derek Simmons said, his tone firm, almost mechanical. Peter gave a polite nod and murmured, "I'm here to see the children's wing, just for a moment." "That's not how this works, sir. Visitors have to check in. I didn't see you at the desk." Peter shifted his weight slightly, leaning on his cane. "I didn't want to cause any trouble," he said simply. His voice, though soft, carried a peculiar steadiness, the kind of calm you hear from men who have already lived through storms. Derek's jaw tightened. Another vagrant, he thought. Another old-timer looking for a warm place to rest. The hospital had been getting more of them lately, and Derek, new to the job and eager to impress, had been told to keep an eye out. "Lighted," Derek said, extending his hand expectantly. Peter's hands fumbled for a moment in his pocket, pulling out an old leather wallet. It was cracked at the seams, the plastic over his driver's license faded and brittle. Derek barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This ID's expired. You need proper identification if you're going to be here." His voice softened a fraction, but the steel was still there. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Peter looked past Derek down the hall. In the distance, through a glass panel, he could see the colorful murals painted in the pediatric wing. Balloons, cartoon animals, hope, memories he could still taste even after all these years. "I just wanted to see it one last time," Peter whispered. Derek sighed, already tired of this interaction. "Sir, I'm not going to tell you again. If you don't leave, I'll have to escort you out." Peter straightened, and for the briefest second something flickered in his pale blue eyes. Something fierce, like the glint of a blade catching the sun. But just as quickly, it was gone. He nodded slowly. "No need to make a fuss, young man." As Peter turned to go, a few nurses passing by shot glances at him, but no one stepped in. No one asked a question. No one recognized the man who had once stood on a national stage, who had once placed a Medal of Honor around his neck, with hands that barely stopped shaking. Derek walked behind him, maintaining the professional distance he had been trained for. "Rules are rules," he muttered under his breath. Peter heard him but said nothing. At the entrance, Peter paused again, breathing in the sterile scent of antiseptic and memory. He could still see it. The day they opened the hospital, children with IV poles racing down the halls, a ribbon-cutting ceremony where they called him a hero and a visionary. He hadn't stayed long even then. Peter was never comfortable with fanfare. He stepped out into the cool evening air, the sun casting long golden beams across the parking lot. The automatic doors whispered shut behind him, almost like a sigh. Inside, Derek radioed in that the situation was resolved. "Old guy tried to wander in without clearance," he said casually. No big deal. Handled it. He didn't notice the receptionist finally glance up, catching the last glimpse of Peter Greene limping toward a rusted old Ford parked at the farthest edge of the lot. Something tugged at the edge of her memory. An old photo in a glass frame near the administrator's office, a face she hadn't thought about in years. She shook her head and turned back to her computer. It didn't matter, not today. But tomorrow it would. Tomorrow, the hospital would know exactly who had walked out their front doors, unnoticed. And it would be too late to erase what had already been seen and felt. Peter Greene sat silently behind the wheel of his old Ford, the engine rattling faintly as he watched the hospital entrance from afar. His fingers traced the worn ridges of the steering wheel, feeling every crack, like the rings of an ancient tree. He remembered when this hospital was nothing more than a wild dream, a desperate plan scribbled on a scrap of paper in a musty veterans' hall 2 towns over. Back then, people said it couldn't be done. They said no one would care enough. No one would fund it. No one would fight for it. Peter had heard no before. It had never stopped him. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the years in his chest, and turned the key. The engine grumbled before settling into a tired hum. As he pulled away from the curb, a few visitors passed in front of the hospital's main windows, laughing, checking their phones, moving through their lives without a second thought. Peter smiled to himself, not with bitterness, but with a bittersweet kind of peace. They didn't know. They didn't have to. That had always been the point. Across town, Derek Simmons clocked out of his shift, tossing his cap into the passenger seat of his sleek black Charger. He leaned back for a moment, exhausted, more from the routine than from anything else. Ever since he'd taken this job, every day blurred into the next. Patrol the lobby, escort the unruly, nod politely at the suits and scrubs who ran the place. It paid better than bouncing at the clubs downtown, and the benefits were good enough for someone still figuring life out. But today left an itch under his skin. That old man. There was something about him Derek couldn't shake. The way he looked at the children's wing, the steadiness in his voice. It wasn't just another loiterer. Something didn't sit right. Still, Derek shoved the thought away as he started the car. He couldn't get distracted by every sad story he bumped into. Rules were rules, and he had done his job. He told himself that twice, then a third time, before turning up the radio. Peter's house was a modest one, tucked near the edge of town, where the sidewalks gave way to gravel and the lawns grew a little wilder. The neighborhood had changed around him over the decades, but his little plot of land stood firm, a stubborn piece of history in a town sprinting toward modernity. Inside, the living room was neat but sparse. The only signs of life were a pair of polished black boots by the door, a collection of framed photos on the mantel, and a battered trunk tucked neatly beneath the window. Peter lowered himself into the armchair with a soft grunt, reaching for the remote to turn on the television. The evening news buzzed to life, the anchor's voice chipper in contrast to the solemnity Peter carried inside. And in today's community spotlight, the anchor chirped, Marigold Regional Hospital celebrates its 40th anniversary this month. Administrators announced a special ceremony to honor founding donors and contributors whose vision made the hospital possible. Peter leaned forward slightly. A slow smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He hadn't been invited. He hadn't expected to be. His name had been quietly edged off the plaques over the years as the hospital expanded, remodeled, corporatized. He had never cared much for plaques anyway. Peter Greene didn't build that hospital to have his name etched in bronze. He built it so no child would ever have to die waiting for care the way his brother had. Still, a part of him stirred just hearing the place mentioned. 40 years. 40 years of healed wounds, saved lives, whispered prayers over hospital beds. He allowed himself that moment of pride before settling back into his chair. A soft knock rattled the screen door. Peter turned his head, cautious. Few people came out this far. Standing awkwardly on the porch was a young woman in scrubs. Tina Morrison. Peter remembered her. She had been one of the first in her family to graduate nursing school, barely 22 years old when she started working at the hospital. She smiled nervously as Peter opened the door. "Mr. Greene, I'm sorry to bother you this late. I wasn't sure you'd even remember me." Peter's eyes softened. "I remember." Tina let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. I saw what happened today with the security guard." Peter chuckled quietly, stepping aside to let her in. "Nothing to be sorry for. Man was just doing his job." "It wasn't right," Tina said, fidgeting with the hem of her scrub top. "You deserve better." Peter waved her off gently. "Nobody owes me anything." Tina hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. Greene, they're planning the anniversary ceremony. They're honoring the major donors. Dr. Reynolds asked me to help organize it." She swallowed hard. "Your name isn't on the list." Peter's gaze remained steady. He didn't seem angry. If anything, he looked almost resigned. "I figured as much," he said simply. Tina's hands clenched into small fists. "That's not right. You gave everything for that place. You—" Peter placed a hand lightly on her arm. His skin was cool but steady. "The hospital stands. That's all that matters." Tina's throat tightened. She had spent years hearing rumors about the quiet man who had made the hospital possible. Whispers among the oldest staff members, half-remembered stories passed down like folklore. Seeing him now, treated like a nobody in the halls he had built, made her stomach twist. "There's going to be a big event," she said, voice trembling. "The mayor's coming. News crews, awards." She met his eyes, desperate. "You should be there. People should know." Peter smiled sadly. "Pride's a dangerous thing, young lady. I've had my fill." "But it's not about pride," Tina insisted. "It's about the truth." Peter didn't answer right away. He studied her, seeing the fire in her expression, the same fire he used to see in the mirror decades ago. "Maybe," he said after a long moment. "Maybe it's time." The next morning, Derek stood stiffly at his post near the entrance. He wasn't used to the formal uniforms the hospital administrators had ordered them to wear for the ceremony. Dress blues with shiny buttons, starched collars that chafed against his skin. Banners had been strung up overnight. News vans clustered in the parking lot. It felt like a completely different place. He caught a glimpse of the event schedule on a clipboard a passing volunteer carried. Names of big donors, local celebrities, hospital executives. The list stretched long. Peter Greene's name wasn't there. Derek's stomach twisted unexpectedly. He didn't know why it bothered him. Maybe it was because he kept seeing flashes of that old man's face, the disappointment hidden under layers of dignity. As he shifted his weight from foot to foot, a commotion at the far end of the parking lot caught his eye. An old Ford rattled to a stop. The door creaked open, and Peter Greene stepped out, a crisp white shirt under a dark blazer, a simple medal pinned to his breast. Not flashy, not loud. It's true. Derek straightened instinctively, feeling something shift in the air around him, something he couldn't quite name yet. And as Peter began to walk toward the hospital, cane tapping against the concrete in a slow, deliberate rhythm, every step seemed to echo louder than the last. Peter Greene's footsteps echoed softly against the polished hospital floors, his cane striking a patient rhythm with each step. Around him, the celebration buzzed. Camera flashes, murmured interviews, the faint clink of glasses from the reception tables near the lobby. He moved unnoticed, a ghost among the living, past pillars decorated with banners and posters celebrating 40 years of excellence, with glossy photos of smiling executives and freshly painted walls. No hint of his name, no trace of the man who had once stood in a muddy clearing with nothing but a promise and a dream in his hands. Derek Simmons watched from his post, unease growing tighter in his gut. There was a quiet authority about Peter that didn't match the shuffle of his steps or the wear of his clothes. It was something older, heavier. Derek's training told him to intervene, to check badges, to enforce the rules, but something deeper, something unspoken, told him to wait. Peter made his way toward the central hall where a crowd was gathering. The main event was minutes from beginning. The speeches, the awards, the fanfare. Families stood clustered together, laughing, sipping coffee, cradling newborns. Young nurses snapped selfies. Administrators in tailored suits straightened their ties and ran through their talking points one last time. Tina Morrison slipped through the crowd like a current against the tide, her eyes scanning anxiously until they found Peter. Relief broke across her face, and she hurried toward him, smoothing down her scrubbed top, cheeks flushed with excitement and nerves. "You can," she breathed. Peter gave her a gentle nod. "Figured I'd see how the old place was holding up." Tina hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was paying too much attention. She handed him a folded piece of paper, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. "What's this?" he asked quietly. "A copy of the original donor ledger." "From the archives?" she whispered. "Your name's at the top." Peter tucked it away without looking. He didn't need to see it. He remembered every cent, every sleepless night, every call to senators and mayors and generals, pulling in favors earned from dusty battlefields and smoky war rooms. Across the hall, Angela Reynolds, the hospital administrator, adjusted her microphone as she stepped up to the temporary podium. Cameras turned in her direction. The room hushed. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice amplified and smooth. "Today we gather to honor the visionaries, the leaders, the compassionate hearts who turned a dream into a reality. Marigold Regional Hospital stands today as a beacon of hope because of them." Applause rose politely from the crowd. Angela smiled, all practiced warmth, and gestured toward a series of large portraits set on easels behind her. Portraits of philanthropists, politicians, and celebrities whose donations had kept the hospital afloat over the years. "Today," Angela continued, "we celebrate the faces you see here, and the many more who believed that no child, no family, should ever face crisis alone." Peter's eyes moved over the glossy portraits without emotion. Not one familiar face. Not one person who had been there in the beginning, when the ground was still raw and the city council refused to fund a pediatric unit. These were the polished replacements history preferred. Easier to market, easier to remember. Tina clenched her fists, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected at least a nod to the past, some mention of the man standing quietly behind the crowd. But there was nothing, not even a whisper. Angela's speech droned on, words polished until they were hollow shells of gratitude. As she launched into the announcement of a new fundraising initiative, Peter turned away, his heart heavier than it had been in years. Derek watched him move through the crowd again, quieter than a man his age should be, as if parting the air itself. He watched the nurse trailing after him, trying and failing to hide the urgency in her eyes. Something wasn't right. Without fully realizing he was doing it, Derek slipped from his post, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease until he caught up to Peter near a quieter alcove by the east wing. "Sir?" Derek said, carefully, not the sharp bark he had used yesterday, but a tone he reserved for people who mattered. Peter turned, his face unreadable. "I just—" Derek hesitated, words tangling in his throat. "I didn't get your name yesterday." Peter's eyes twinkled just a little. "Didn't ask." Derek rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Yeah, sorry about that. Are you here with someone?" "For the ceremony?" Peter considered the question, then answered simply, "No, just here to remember." Something inside Derek twisted. He opened his mouth to say something, he didn't even know what, but Tina appeared at his side, clutching a hospital brochure to her chest like a shield. "She heed his words as Peter Greene," she said, her voice shaking slightly, loud enough for Derek but low enough to avoid drawing more attention. "The man who built this place." Derek blinked, stunned, as if she had spoken a foreign language. He looked at Peter again, really looked, and something clicked, something he hadn't even known he was missing. "You're kidding," he whispered. Peter just smiled, a quiet, tired smile. At the podium, Angela announced the unveiling of a new donor wall, built to replace the older, smaller plaques. A long velvet curtain covered the wall near the main lobby. Staffers gathered around it with eager expressions. "And now, to celebrate our history and our future," Angela said, beaming at the cameras, "we proudly reveal the names of those whose generosity will inspire generations to come." She nodded, and two assistants yanked the cord. The curtain dropped. The new wall glittered under the bright lights, dozens of names etched into gleaming panels, a modern monument to wealth and legacy. Peter's name was nowhere among them. Stina's hands trembled. Derek swore under his breath. Around them, polite applause broke out. Cameras flashed. The mayor clapped Angela on the shoulder with congratulatory enthusiasm. Peter said nothing. He didn't move. He stood as still as stone, watching the celebration unfold around him, letting it wash over him like the tide. But Darren moved. He didn't know why he did it, didn't even think. One second he was standing there, the next he was cutting through the crowd, weaving between bodies until he reached the stage. Angela's smile faltered as she saw him approach. "Excuse me," Derek said into the microphone, his voice carrying through the speakers with startling clarity. Angela's face froze. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I just wanted to point something out," Derek said. His hands shook slightly, but he tightened his grip on the microphone. "There's someone here today who doesn't have his name on the wall. Someone without whom none of this would even exist." He looked out over the crowd, searching, until his eyes found Peter, standing alone near the back. "His name is Peter Greene," Derek said, voice steadying with each word, "and he's the reason this hospital was built in the first place." Dead silence filled the room. Angela's face paled. Tina's eyes welled with tears. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. Then, somewhere near the middle of the crowd, an old man in a Vietnam veteran's cap rose to his feet, clapping his hands once, twice. A young nurse followed, a doctor, a mother holding a baby. One by one, they stood. One by one, they clapped. Not the polite, rehearsed applause from before, but something real, something raw. Peter didn't move at first. He simply watched, his heart hammering inside his chest, the sound of hands striking together echoing in his ears louder than any battlefield he had ever crossed. And for the first time in years, Peter Greene let himself be seen. The applause thundered through the hospital corridors, spilling past the lobby and into the sterile white hallways beyond. Peter Greene stood motionless, his cane gripped loosely in one hand, his face unreadable under the swelling sound. He hadn't asked for this moment. He hadn't wanted it. And yet, there it was, undeniable and alive, building around him like a tide that refused to be stopped. Angela Reynolds stiffened at the podium, her perfect smile slipping into something brittle and uncertain. She leaned into the microphone, her voice cutting through the applause with forced brightness. "Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We're here to honor all of our contributors, past and present." But the energy had shifted. The crowd no longer watched her. They watched Peter. Tita wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her scrubs, stepping forward to guide Peter closer to the gathering. For a moment, Peter resisted, rooted to the ground like an old oak refusing to bend. Then, with a soft sigh, he nodded and followed her toward the center of the room. Derek fell into step beside him, an unspoken protector now, eyes scanning the crowd not for threats but for witnesses, to make sure they really saw the man walking among them. As Peter approached, conversations broke out in hasty whispers. "Peter Greene? I thought he moved away years ago." "Didn't he serve? I heard he donated everything he had." "My dad used to talk about him when I was a kid, said he was the real deal." By the time Peter reached the edge of the stage, several more had stood. Doctors still in their scrubs, families clutching toddlers, teenagers with backpacks, volunteers in maroon jackets. They all rose, a rolling wave of respect sweeping across the lobby. Angela adjusted her microphone again, her throat dry. She glanced toward the side of the stage where hospital board members exchanged tense looks. This wasn't part of the program. This wasn't controlled. Peter, for his part, said nothing. He simply stood there, letting the moment fill itself. Derek leaned in toward Tina and whispered, "Is there anything about him in the hospital archives? Records, or—" Tina nodded, still blinking back tears. "There's a whole file buried under donor contracts. His Medal of Honor money started the first fund. His campaign got the first grants approved. Half the first building. His connections paid for it after Congress refused local aid." Derek whistled low under his breath. "And they forgot him?" Tina looked at him, her voice like a blade. "They didn't forget. They just found shinier names." Angela tapped the microphone again, pulling a thin corporate smile onto her face. "Mr. Greene," she said, her voice ringing too loudly in the sudden hush, "we are, of course, deeply grateful for your early contributions. It's because of supporters like you that Marigold Regional Hospital stands as a pillar of our community." Peter tilted his head slightly, studying her as one might study a faintly offensive painting. "Not angry. Just disappointed." Angela pressed on. "Although today's event is focused on celebrating the most recent growth and expansions, your role in our founding is certainly acknowledged with great appreciation." A beat passed, and another. Peter shifted his weight onto his cane, his voice carrying without need of a microphone. "You don't have to lie, young lady." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sharp, unapologetic. "You've forgotten," Peter continued, his tone low and even. "You moved on. You sold pieces of this place for bigger names and newer faces. That's the way of things." Angela's mouth opened, then shut again. "And that's all right," Peter said, surprising even Tina with the softness that crept into his voice. "It was never about me." Murmurs swept through the crowd again, but no one interrupted. Peter turned slightly, addressing the crowd instead of the administrators. "This hospital wasn't built on money alone," he said, voice growing stronger with each word. "It was built on promises. Promises that no parent would have to choose between bankruptcy and saving their child. Promises that no child would be turned away because they didn't have the right insurance or the right zip code. People listened, really listened, now. I wasn't the only one," Peter said. "There were others. Nurses who worked 2 jobs to keep the doors open. Doctors who refused to bill families who couldn't pay. Volunteers who cleaned floors and mended bedsheets because it needed to be done." He paused, searching the faces before him. "This place isn't about names on walls. It's about hands that heal. About hearts that remember why we started." A silence deeper than applause followed him. Angela shifted uncomfortably behind the podium, but she said nothing. A few rows back, a local news cameraman instinctively zoomed in on Peter's weathered face, sensing the real story unfolding. Derek watched it all, feeling a knot unwind in his chest. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about protocol. It was about decency. About truth. Peter stepped back then, as if the weight of so many eyes had finally grown too heavy, but before he could retreat into the crowd, someone broke the silence. A nurse, maybe 25 years old, raised her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Greene." Then another voice joined, and another. "Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for fighting for us." The words rolled across the lobby like a second wave, powerful and unstoppable. Peter bowed his head briefly, overwhelmed in a way he hadn't been even on the day he received his Medal of Honor. That day had been about survival, about honoring the dead. This was about the living. Tina moved to his side, touching his elbow lightly. "Come with me," she whispered. He let her guide him down a side hallway, away from the crowd, away from the flashing cameras and the sudden flood of attention he neither needed nor sought. As they walked, Derek followed a few steps behind, determined now to stay close, to ensure the man received the respect he deserved. They passed the old donor wall tucked behind a waiting area, small, forgotten, dusty from years of neglect, names etched in brass plates tarnished by time. Peter paused before it. His finger traced along the plates until he found it, near the bottom, his name, simple and unadorned. Peter A. Greene, Simon the benefactor. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Small font, he said, smiling at Tina. But it's there, she whispered back. He turned, leaning heavier on his cane now, the exertion of the day catching up to him. Let's go home, he said quietly. As they moved toward the exit, Derek jogged ahead to open the door for him, standing at attention like a soldier saluting a general. Peter gave him a small nod of thanks, a nod that Derek would carry for the rest of his life. Outside, the sky stretched wide and blue, the air crisp with the promise of change. Peter paused on the steps, taking it in one last time. Behind him, through the glass doors, he could see faces pressed close, watching. Not out of pity. Not out of duty. Respect. Real, earned respect. Peter Greene tapped his cane against the ground twice, a soldier's farewell, and turned away from the hospital he had built, knowing that finally it remembered him. The morning after the ceremony, Peter Greene sat at his kitchen table, nursing a black coffee that had long gone cold. The soft creak of his old house settling filled the silence around him. He had returned home the night before, exhausted, heart full but heavy, head swimming with faces and voices from a world that had almost forgotten him. A part of him expected the buzz to die down overnight, for the world to move on as it always had. After all, what was one old man in a town so eager to chase the future? Peter shifted the folded copy of the local paper toward him. Front page, above the fold, a color photograph of him standing in the hospital lobby, back straight, cane planted like a flag in front of him. The headline was simple but powerful. The man who built Marigold Hospital. Peter ran his fingers over the picture, tracing the faint lines of his own face. Beneath the headline, the article recounted the ceremony, the forgotten history, the reaction of the crowd. It named him a hero, a founder, a legend. Peter exhaled a soft, disbelieving laugh. After all this time, they finally remembered? The knock at the door startled him. Peter pushed up from the table, joints protesting, and made his way to the front door. When he opened it, a small group stood on his porch. Tina, Derek, and two others he didn't recognize immediately, one in a suit, the other in casual clothes, holding a large envelope. Tina smiled, nervous but hopeful. "Mr. Greene," she said, "we were hoping you might have a few minutes." Peter nodded once and stepped aside, waving them in. They filled the small living room awkwardly, the newcomers clutching the envelope like it contained something sacred. The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Mr. Greene, my name's Todd Bennett. I'm with the city council." He hesitated, then added, "First, I want to apologize on behalf of everyone." Peter raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For forgetting," Todd said simply. "For letting your contributions, your sacrifices, fade into the background." Peter sank back into his chair and shrugged. "History moves fast." Todd nodded solemnly. "Doesn't mean we should let it pass you by." The young woman stepped forward then, holding out the envelope with both hands. "We'd like to make things right." Peter took the envelope cautiously, opening it with fingers that felt strangely clumsy. Inside he found two documents. The first was a letter, an official declaration signed by the mayor and council members, establishing a permanent new wing at the hospital, the Peter Greene Children's Recovery Center. Peter's mouth parted slightly in surprise. Pod continued, "It's not just a plaque. It's an entire new expansion for pediatric rehabilitation, state-of-the-art equipment, therapy gardens, private family suites, funded by a combination of city grants and private donations, and your story is the foundation of it." Peter sat back, overwhelmed. Tina leaned closer, her voice soft. "They're naming it after you, so no one forgets again." For a long moment, Peter said nothing. His throat tightened, and he cleared it roughly, blinking hard. The second document in the envelope was a framed photograph, a restored black-and-white image from the hospital's groundbreaking ceremony decades ago. There he stood, young and proud, hard hat tilted back on his head, shovel in hand, surrounded by a group of volunteers and nurses. Peter brushed a thumb over the photo's edge, feeling the weight of every year between then and now. He finally looked up, eyes damp but fierce. "Thank you," he said simply. Todd smiled. "It's the least we can do." Derek shifted from foot to foot, clearing his throat. "There's one more thing." Peter tilted his head. "There's going to be a new donor wall," Derek said. "A real one this time, built where everyone can see it the moment they walk in. Your name's going right at the top." Peter chuckled quietly. "Bigger font." Much bigger," Tina said, grinning. The visitors stayed only a few more minutes, long enough to drink a cup of instant coffee that Peter insisted on making himself, long enough to share a few quiet laughs, long enough to leave the old man with something new warming in his chest. When they left, Peter stood at the door for a long time, the framed photo cradled against his side, watching their cars disappear down the road. And he wasn't alone. He had never really been alone. That afternoon, a line of cars began to appear along the gravel road leading to Peter's house. Curious faces peered out from windows. Neighbors he hadn't seen in years, old friends who had drifted away with time, parents with their children, teenagers clutching cell phones, capturing the moment. Peter opened the door, puzzled as the first few approached. A boy about 10 years old stepped forward nervously, holding a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in newspaper. "These are for you," he said shyly, thrusting them out. Peter knelt stiffly, accepting the flowers with hands that trembled just a little. "Thank you, son," he said. Others followed. Handwritten cards, plates of food, photos of children who had been treated at Marigold Hospital over the decades. Stories poured out. How the hospital had saved a premature baby. How it had caught a rare diagnosis just in time. How it had given families a place to hope when everything else seemed lost. By sunset, Peter's living room overflowed with tokens of gratitude. Flowers spilled from vases. Thank you notes covered the coffee table. Plates of casseroles and pies crowded the counter. Peter moved among them slowly, overwhelmed, touched by every word, every smile, every tearful hug. Outside, Derek parked his car at the end of the driveway, watching the steady stream of visitors with a small, private smile. He didn't need to say anything. He had done what mattered. He had made sure the town remembered. Peter finally settled back into his armchair as the evening deepened, holding a card in his lap, written in a shaky hand. "Thank you for giving my daughter a chance to grow up." The words blurred as Peter's vision blurred, but he didn't wipe the tears away. He let them come, free and quiet, like rain after a long, hard drought. As twilight fell, Peter Greene sat surrounded not by medals or plaques, but by something infinitely more valuable. A community, a legacy, 1,000 silent promises fulfilled. And for the first time in many years he let himself close his eyes and rest, knowing he had not been forgotten after all. The morning of the dedication ceremony dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that seemed to hum with quiet promise. Peter Greene buttoned his best jacket slowly, feeling the stiffness in his fingers more than usual, but refusing the offer of help from Tina, who hovered nearby like a worried daughter. His movements were slow but certain, each step of preparation a ritual he hadn't performed in years. When he slipped the Medal of Honor around his neck, its ribbon worn but still vibrant, he paused in front of the mirror, studying the reflection staring back at him. The man in the mirror was older, yes, thinner, but the same fire still flickered deep in his eyes, undiminished by the decades that had worn down the rest of him. He adjusted the medal slightly, then nodded at himself, satisfied. Outside, the streets leading toward Marigold Regional Hospital were lined with flags, families, and news crews. Peter sat in the back of a modest black sedan provided by the city council, watching the town roll past his window. Everywhere he looked, people stood waiting, not for a parade, not for a politician, but for him. When the car pulled up in front of the hospital, the crowd parted to create a path. Derek stood by the doors, his posture rigid with pride, and as Peter stepped out, Derek offered a crisp salute. Peter paused for a moment, then returned it, the old muscle memory snapping into place. The ceremony was set up just outside the new wing, a large white tent covering a stage where rows of chairs stretched out across the lawn. The new plaque had been installed overnight, covered now by a heavy velvet cloth. A brass band played soft music as people took their seats, the air electric with anticipation. Angela Reynolds stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, visibly humbled but no longer hiding behind polished smiles. She approached Peter cautiously, offering a hand that he shook firmly, without grudge. "Mr. Greene," she said quietly, "this day belongs to you. It always should have." Peter offered her a nod. There was nothing else that needed to be said. Tina walked with him to the front row, where a chair had been reserved with a simple sign, "Peter Greene, Guest of Honor." He sank into it carefully, cane resting across his knees, soaking in the sight of hundreds gathered to celebrate something he had once built with nothing but faith and grit. Todd Bennett from the city council took the stage first, his voice carrying through the speakers with steady warmth. "Today," he said, "we correct a mistake. We honor a man who asked for nothing but gave everything. Peter Greene didn't build this hospital for recognition. He built it because he believed in a simple truth, that no one, especially our children, should ever suffer alone." Applause rose, strong and genuine. Peter bowed his head slightly, his heart swelling painfully against his ribs. Todd continued, recounting Peter's service, his sacrifices, and the countless families touched by the hospital over the years. He spoke not from a script, but from something deeper, something real. And when he gestured toward the plaque, 2 children, patients from the hospital, stepped forward to pull back the velvet covering. The cloth fell away with a soft whisper, revealing a gleaming bronze tablet mounted to the stone wall. "Peter A. Greene, Children's Recovery Center. In honor of service, sacrifice, and endless compassion." Below the main inscription, a line carved in smaller script read, "Built with valor, sustained by hope." The crowd rose as one, the sound of their applause rolling across the lawn like thunder. Peter struggled to his feet, helped gently by Tina, and turned to face them. The sun caught the medal on his chest, making it gleam like a second heart beating outside his body. He wasn't a man of speeches, he never had been, but as he took the stage, the microphone adjusted low enough for him, the words came not from rehearsed lines, but from the marrow of his bones. "I built this hospital," he said simply, "because I remembered what it felt like to be helpless." He paused, the crowd holding its breath. "I remembered standing at a bedside and knowing there was nothing anyone could do. I remembered promises made to people who never lived to see them kept. And I remembered that sometimes the only battles worth fighting are the ones no one else can see." A few in the crowd wiped their eyes. Others simply stood straighter, chins lifting with a pride that felt almost sacred. Peter smiled then, slow and genuine. "This hospital stands because we believed in each other, and it will keep standing long after all our names are forgotten, because of what we chose to build together." He stepped back, nodding once, and the crowd surged forward, not to overwhelm him, but to simply be near him, to be part of the living history he represented. Children hugged him shyly, veterans clasped his hand, their grips firm with unspoken brotherhood. Nurses and doctors took photos with him, not for publicity, but for memory. Later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Peter walked slowly through the new wing. Each room was bright, filled with light and color, designed with love for the children who would heal there. Murals of forests and oceans covered the walls. Laughter echoed faintly from therapy rooms, and gardens bloomed just outside the wide glass windows. In the corner of the main hallway stood a bronze statue, not of Peter himself, but of a soldier kneeling beside a child, a shield in one hand and an outstretched palm in the other. The plaque beneath it read simply, "To those who fought for our futures, and to those who carry them forward." Peter stood before it for a long while, feeling the years fall away, replaced by something light, something enduring. Derek found him there, hands in his pockets, unsure whether to interrupt. Peter spoke first without turning. "You did a good thing, son." Derek shifted awkwardly, a little embarrassed. "Just did what was right, sir." Peter finally turned, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's all any of us can do." Outside, the celebration continued. Music, food, children laughing as they chased each other through the grass. Life, the very thing Pete had fought for, had dreamed of preserving, pulsed vibrantly all around him. As he walked out onto the hospital steps once more, Tina hurried up with a cup of lemonade, laughing breathlessly. "Don't you dare leave before taking a picture," she said, teasing. Peter chuckled, allowing her to pull him into a group shot surrounded by the hospital staff, Derek, city council members, and dozens of smiling faces. The camera flashed, and in that frozen moment, Peter Greene was not just a man who had been forgotten and remembered. He was something far greater. He was the foundation of a living, breathing legacy, a testament to courage, to resilience, to the simple, stubborn belief that the world could be made better if only someone dared to build it. That night, as Peter sat once again at his kitchen table, the new newspapers spread before him with a headline declaring the opening of the Peter Greene Children's Recovery Center, he didn't feel the old weight of loneliness or regret. He felt peace. Real, abiding peace. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the quiet hum of the night, the distant sounds of the town alive and thriving. Peter Greene closed his eyes, a soft smile lingering on his lips. His story wasn't about medals or buildings or speeches. It was about the lives touched, the futures protected, and the hope built with bare hands and an unbreakable heart. As long as Marigold Regional Hospital stood, so too would the spirit of Peter Greene. Forever.